If you had never seen a single episode of Dexter and wanted to know what it was all about but could only watch one episode, I don't think there would be a better candidate than episode 5 of season 2 called The Dark Defender. And I say that because it kind of gives you that same feeling that you get when they say the name of the movie in the movie and there's a moment of clarity where you realize what the name means and how it connects to the theme of the story.
What, we some kind of Suicide Squad?
Alright, so some movies do it better than others, but still, that's what this episode does. Except instead of just saying the name of the series, this episode says the one question that's been on every viewer's mind since the pilot episode. It's the first episode where the show really puts all of its cards on the table. If you don't know, Dexter is a series that debuted in 2006 about a seemingly normal guy, Dexter Morgan. He works with Miami Metro as a blood spatter analyst and doesn't have many friends other than his adoptive sister, who he's very close with, and his girlfriend, who he also cares very much about. Dexter is a pretty unremarkable guy. Well, most of the time, because when he's not analyzing blood spatters to help solve murders, he's the one doing the murdering. That's right, the series follows Dexter as he juggles being a brother, boyfriend, father, employee, and yes, serial killer. And there we have the hook of the show. It's what makes the character of Dexter and the show itself something unique. But how could you ever get an audience to root for or even care about a serial killer? I mean, after all, this is one of the worst things a human being can be. Well, it turns out that Dexter has a code. He only kills those who he himself can prove to be killers and are also likely to kill again. So right off the bat, the viewer has to deal with conflicting feelings about Dexter. On one hand, he's making sure criminals who fall through the cracks of the system are brought to justice, but on the other hand, he's making himself judge, jury, and executioner. And if that's not good TV, then I don't know what is. I think nowadays we're more accustomed to seeing movies and TV shows about characters who aren't exactly good guys. Breaking Bad is a classic example of a show that would debut 2 years after Dexter with a very similar formula. Take a seemingly normal guy, give him a highly illegal and dangerous hobby, and let's see what happens. But when you compare Dexter to a show like Breaking Bad, it actually highlights something that makes Dexter stand out within this genre, and it's also that very thing that makes the episode in question such a good representation of the whole show. While both of these shows aim to question the idea of right and wrong, they do it in very different ways. For example, Walt's journey begins when he's diagnosed with terminal cancer and decides to start cooking meth in order to make some money to leave behind with his family. He doesn't set out to hurt anyone, and even though it is stupid, it does appear to be a noble cause, so I think most audience members have no problem siding with Walt in the beginning. But after he realizes how good he is at cooking meth, he loses himself in his own power, and by the end of the show, he's a completely different person. He's killed innocent people, neglected his family, poisoned a child, and, well, I could go on. So somewhere along the way, the audience would start to feel like Walt's actions were no longer defensible. And this is a fairly common character arc, the one where pride, money, power, or whatever it is, slowly but surely turns a good person into a bad one. And this is where Dexter strays from the status quo. And it's also where I'm going to give you a light spoiler warning. I'm not going to get into the details, but I will be spoiling the ending of Dexter. Dexter is different because he doesn't really change in that way throughout the show. In other words, you might expect a similar arc for Dexter, where maybe he becomes more unhinged as the series goes on, but that doesn't happen. He has an unchanging code and he sticks to it. Therefore, when you are watching the show, the first episode will push you morally just as far as the last one does. So then, what's the point of it all if we're not going to have some dark, twisted character arc? Well, a lot happens throughout the show's 8-season run, but I think there's one question that the series attempts to answer the whole way through. Is Dexter Morgan a hero or is he a villain? And that's where the episode that I mentioned earlier comes into play. At this point in the series, the police have found where Dexter has been dumping his victims' bodies, and they've opened up a massive investigation to catch him, or the Bay Harbor Butcher, as the media have named him. They're able to identify all of the Bay Harbor Butcher's victims as terrible criminals, and in this episode we hear various points of view from Miami residents. Some obviously scared knowing that there's a dangerous serial killer among them, but others find comfort in the fact that the Bay Harbor Butcher is out there serving up justice to those who deserve it. In the beginning of the episode, Dexter is analyzing a crime scene inside of a comic book store when he sees a poster that piques his interest.
Who's that?
The Dark Defender. Denny had this great idea to put a spin on that vigilante serial killer we got running around.
Definitely has a nicer ring to it than the Bay Harbor Butcher.
Denny was trying to set up the Dark Defender as a graphic novel. Stalker of the night, his blade of vengeance turns wrong into right.
the Dark Defender, a character based off of Dexter himself, a masked vigilante that roams the night streets, bringing criminals to justice in a way that the system never could. Sounds kind of familiar, doesn't it? Now, you might expect this moment to kick off a character arc for Dexter that has his ego grow dangerously large and inevitably leads to him playing God, going on a killing spree in the name of justice or whatever. But like I said, that's not Dexter's character, and that's never been what the show was about. The Dark Defender doesn't give Dexter the ego boost that you might expect, but it does cause him to do some self-reflecting. All of this time, he's thought of himself as a monster, but now that other people are able to see what Dexter's doing, he realizes that not everyone has that same opinion. So, in the end, what is Dexter? Is he a character from a comic book, The Dark Defender? Or is he a monster, the Bay Harbor Butcher? I think overall, the show does a pretty good job of actually answering this question, but probably not in the way that you'd think. In an earlier episode, Dexter's long-lost, also serial killer brother leaves him a person to kill as kind of a twisted gift. Yeah, it's complicated, but the details aren't important right now. What matters is that Dexter is in a position to kill an innocent man and no one would ever know. And even though Dexter does have a moral code like we talked about earlier, he also has what he calls his dark passenger, which is basically a euphemism for his urge to kill. And this is why his father taught him that if he must kill, then it can never be an innocent person. So in this moment, Dexter is caught between two versions of himself. The one that his long-lost brother wants him to be, which is the merciless Bay Harbor Butcher, or the one that his father wanted him to be, which is the heroic Dark Defender. In the end, Dexter decides not to take the free kill that was left for him, and he has this to say about it at the end of the episode.
I'm not the monster he wants me to be. So I'm neither man nor beast. I'm something new entirely, with my own set of rules. I'm Dexter.
So maybe he's not a cold-blooded serial killer, but he's also not a good guy. After all, he still has his dark passenger. So he's somewhere in between. Just like he puts it, he's Dexter. And funnily enough, the scene that we just watched takes place before the episode that we've been talking about. So it's established very early on that Dexter doesn't think of himself as necessarily good or bad. And even though he kind of plays jump rope with the line, this idea never really changes. And I think this is actually reflected really well in the series' controversial ending. And if you're a fan of the show, then you know that this ending was not the best, and I'm not really here to defend it or anything, but it does do a good job of finishing the show in a very Dexter-y way. After watching 8 seasons, you might expect a Bay Harbor Butcher ending, where Dexter gets caught and is sentenced to a life in prison, or possibly the chair. And even though that would be a very dark ending, it's still something that, in a way, Dexter deserves. On the other hand, you might expect a heroic ending, where Dexter successfully evades the police, his sister can finally accept him for who he is, and he lives happily ever after with his wife and kids, while also keeping the streets clean. And even though that is a very happy ending, it is something that, in a way, Dexter deserves. After all, you could argue that over the years, Dexter has actually saved many more lives than he's taken by killing the killers. But in the end, we didn't get either of these endings. In reality, Dexter loses his sister and his wife due to him trying to live a double life. He doesn't get caught by the police, but he's also unable to continue living his normal life in Miami. He has a chance to live happily ever after with the girl of his dreams, but he realizes that he'd be putting more people in danger by doing that, so he goes into hiding and, well, the end. That's all she wrote. Not exactly a tragic ending, but definitely not a happy one, which is in line with Dexter himself. Like we saw in the beginning of the video, he's not a hero, but he's also not a villain. So an ending like this one, in the mind of Dexter anyway, is what he deserves. And speaking of not heroes, there's one last thing I want to talk about that's going to help us answer our titular question, and that is everyone's favorite masked vigilante, Batman. Like I said in the show, the Dark Defender is a comic book character that was based off of Dexter himself, who, let's face it, is like a version of Batman. And Dexter and the Bat definitely do have a lot in common. Tragic backstory, mentally broken, with a knack for justice. The only real difference is while Batman refuses to kill,
And when I killed you, and make no mistake, I will kill you.
Okay, most Batmen refuse to kill, but killing is Dexter's favorite part of the job. I thought this was an interesting comparison because, as Harvey Dent says, you either die a hero or live long enough to see yourself become the villain. And just like Batman in The Dark Knight, Dexter does not live long enough to see himself become the villain because he never considered himself to be a hero. Like we already mentioned, Dexter isn't slowly corrupted throughout the series like you might expect. His morals never change. At the end of the day, we don't even know if he kills criminals just because he feels the need to exact justice, or if he does it simply because he feels the urge to kill and that's the only way to do it with a clean conscience. So he's not the terrible Bay Harbor Butcher, and he's not the triumphant Dark Defender. He's Dexter. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. If you haven't watched Dexter, then I definitely recommend it. Thanks again, and everybody stay gold.